Good morning, Mr. Malusi.
Morning, Chief Justice and the Honorable Commissioners.
Are you well?
I'm well, thank you, Chief Justice. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Just in your own words, bearing in mind what transpired previously, just tell us about your readiness for appointment now.
Chief Justice, the main issue when I was last year was the issue relating to the delayed judgments. To be frank and honest, I should thank the Commission because I am the better for it. What had transpired is I went back to the Eastern Cape. The Judge President offered me further opportunities to act. When I got there to act, most of the judges there, because they held the view that my difficulties with the delayed judgments were neither due to incompetence nor indolence, just about everyone came to assist to say it would be best if you approached it this way. What works for me is this, what works for me is that. I gained incredible experience. With respect and humility, I believe I am a better person now. The judgments are delivered on time. I was acting this past term. As I sit here, all the judgments from the term have been delivered, Chief Justice.
And there is no problem that could impact negatively on your prospects of appointment?
Chief Justice, a matter came up after the shortlist, and the shortlist was publicized in the local papers in the Eastern Cape. The Commission has received a complaint, but this complaint relates to a matter that is known to this Commission.
Yes.
I'm an officer of the court, I'm an attorney.
Maybe you could start off by just saying, this is the complaint, this is my response. You know it, I'm sure.
Chief Justice, the complaint relates to the civil matter, which I had disclosed to the Commission when I first came here on the 8th of October 2014. When I next came, on the 15th of April 2015, Commissioner Singh, because he did not see that civil matter, asked pertinently what had happened to it, and I addressed the Commission then. The complaint, it's the plaintiff's representative in that matter. He has set out his case as he testified in the civil trial. What had transpired is that the matter went on trial. The regional magistrate who had the matter delivered a judgment. He gave absolution from the instance, effectively saying, I did not need to testify on the complainant's or the plaintiff's own evidence. She was not satisfied that a proper case had been made out. The judgment was delivered on the 27th of October 2014. The complainant sat on it for 9 months. On the 2nd of July 2015, he noted an appeal. The appeal was only heard on the 17th of July this year. The learned judges delivered their judgment on the 27th of July this year, effectively saying the regional magistrate had used a wrong standard to grant absolution. The matter must go back to the regional court and proceed from there. That's the essence of the appeal. The plaintiff in that matter wrote to this commission to say, in his view, I cannot or I should not be appointed because there is this pending matter, which I differ significantly with the plaintiff, Chief Justice.
Deputy Judge President.
Thank you, Chief Justice. Good morning, Mr. Malusi.
Morning, Deputy Judge President.
Mr. Malusi, you've acted in Port Elizabeth, as I understand it, the last term. Is that correct?
That's correct, Judge Fonse.
Do you have any outstanding judgments?
No, I do not, Judge.
It's confirmed that I've spoken to the senior judge who has confirmed that your last 3 judgments were handed down last week, as I understand it, your outstanding judgments.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's correct, Judge President.
Yes. Issue which I have to raise with you, Mr. Malusi, concerns the civil case that you've just addressed. I'll tell you what is of concern is that in light of the appeal, the matter now has to go back to the Magistrates Court for the trial to continue, as I understand it. And it seems to me, if I read the papers which I have been given, that the issue between you and the plaintiffs in that matter are of a nature which would require the magistrate to make factual findings, which may involve credibility findings. And it seems to me that the crux of the dispute is as to whether or not the plaintiffs negotiated with you with regard to the contract which they allege has, they say, exists. That being the case, and where the magistrate would be required to make credibility findings, don't you think that is a matter which should be of concern, that may impact on your integrity? Would you like to comment on that?
Thank you, Deputy Judge President. Indeed, it is expected that there will be credibility findings because the version they are presenting to the court and the version I am presenting are mutually destructive. Unfortunately, I am precluded by the sub judice rule from discussing fully the merits of the case. I can only say the Commission can get an idea from the fact that the regional magistrate granted absolution from the instance without me having to testify. I am not concerned at all that there may well be, or there is a probability that there is going to be a credibility finding against me. The High Court that had the matter made the ruling that the wrong standard was used. This is not the time to make a credibility finding against the plaintiff's witness. That was the main issue.
Yes, thank you. The other issue that I want to raise with you, your practice is, as an attorney, is based in East London.
That's correct, Judge.
Your wife is also an attorney with you in the same practice, am I correct?
That's correct.
Well, if you get appointed to Bisho, the fact that your practice is situated and you're obviously residing in East London won't pose any difficulties. But if you were to be appointed in Port Elizabeth, do you plan to relocate to Port Elizabeth? And isn't that going to create difficulties for you, seeing that you would leave your wife behind in your practice, or what exactly are your plans? And I'll tell you the reason why I'm raising this is that we very often, unfortunately in the Eastern Cape with the 4 courts, judges are very quick to take appointments to a certain station while living somewhere else, and it creates problems. Judges tend to want to start their weekends early and tend to arrive late on a Monday, and it's caused exactly by that problem. If you are appointed in Port Elizabeth, how do you intend addressing that matter?
If I were to be recommended by the Commission to the Port Elizabeth post, without sounding presumptuous that I'm making assumptions out of the Commission, but it's a matter I discussed with my wife. We had agreed that we will have to relocate to Port Elizabeth. Without making light of the situation, in the last couple of weeks, she's been telling me about the house prices in Port Elizabeth, what are the better suburbs there, that sort of thing. It's a decision that I have discussed with her. She is agreeable to it, and arrangements have been made with a colleague of hers for her to resume her practice in Port Elizabeth. But as I say, Deputy Judge President, I would be misleading the Commission to say absolute decisions have been taken. If the recommendation comes, it's a possibility we have considered. I certainly will relocate.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Malusi. Thank you, Chief Justice.
Thank you.
Thank you, DJP. Premier?
Thank you very much, Chief Justice. Morning.
Morning, Premier.
You have made. You did say that as an officer of the court, you've got certain responsibilities, certainly, and I'm just pursuing the question the Judge President has made on this matter, which again you cannot be able to speak to it in detail. I'm trying to think this body is should be in an invidious position, having to consider and make a determination whilst there is a matter that is pending, so to speak. If you were to put yourself in the shoes of the Commission, I know it's a bit difficult in that you are an applicant there. What can you say to allay the fears, if there are?
Thank you, Premier. Premier, my view, it's obviously a biased view because I'm an involved party in the matter. But my view is the matter has been before an independent tribunal. A procedural error has been made as found by the High Court. But on the facts, on the merits, without me getting to the merits, I can assure this Commission, Premier, that on the merits there is absolutely nothing to it.
All right.
The one concern is as raised by the Deputy Judge President, that it would impact on the judiciary if a credibility finding were to be made against a sitting judge in a court of law. That I accept. But all I am saying to this Commission, with respect, that is a possibility because I am a defendant in the matter. But when we now look practically on the issues involved, the fact that the regional magistrate, without even hearing me, made this determination, I would say the Commission ought to take comfort from that.
Now, my last question would be to do with really a view that exists out there about access to justice. I'm happy the matter that was raised before of delays in the issuing of judgments has been attended to. But generally, the notion that justice is accessible only to those who are well-to-do does it hold any merit to you? What's your comment on that? And if so, what is your contribution in creating conditions for greater access?
Premier, the issue of access to justice in our country is a valid concern. There is access in the sense of we are a fully fledged democracy. People are free to vindicate their rights in courts of law. The government has gone a long way in making sure that courts are available in all areas of our country. But a creeping problem is that it is becoming prohibitive for ordinary litigants to vindicate their rights in court. It's an issue that has to be addressed, because for an ordinary citizen to instruct either an attorney or counsel is becoming well beyond the means. But the Legal Aid Board, in my view, Premier, is doing sterling work in that regard.
Thank you, Premier. Commissioner Helens.
Thank you. Morning, Mr. Malusi.
Morning, Commissioner.
Mr. Malusi, would you agree that a judge remains an ordinary member of society in terms of his obligations to his fellow man in society?
Indeed, Commissioner.
So you're also required not to drive negligently, you're required to pay your electricity bill, you're required to honor all the normal obligations of an ordinary member of society.
Indeed, Commissioner, our Constitution says no one is above the law. Even if you are a judge, you have to obey the law.
Now, there was civil litigation against you. We've read the complaint and I've listened to your answers. Were there any postponements of the case before it got to the absolution stage?
Indeed, there were, Commissioner, a number of them.
Were any of those postponements due to the fact that you were unavailable by virtue of you being an acting judge?
Commissioner, there was one, I remember distinctly, a postponement because I had been acting. What had transpired there is that there apparently was a change in policy of the Department of Justice or the Office of the Chief Justice, in that a candidate was forwarded by the Judge President who was practicing, I think, either in Natal or Gauteng. And this person could not come to the Eastern Cape because there apparently had been a policy change that you have to be practicing in the Eastern Cape to be appointed to act in the Eastern Cape. There were these cost-saving measures. I was phoned by the Judge President Sangoni on the Sunday morning to say he cannot get anyone else to act. Would I make myself available to act? And when I indicated that amongst the issues I had was this upcoming matter, he indicated that he would prevail on the plaintiff's attorneys because there were these difficulties with him not getting anyone to act and the term starting the following day. But beyond that, I cannot recall any other postponement, Commissioner, because I was acting.
I don't want to drag the Judge President Sangoni into the matter, as he then was. Did you regard it as proper to say to a fellow member of society who was litigating against you, who had a court date, who was entitled to take you to court on that date, that he should forego his right to litigate against you because pro tem for that day you had become a judge?
Commissioner, it was the exigencies of the situation.
No, but the exigencies of the situation, did that elevate your status from being answerable to a plaintiff as a defendant to not being answerable because you're a judge?
No, I did not regard myself as being in any way different because I was a judge.
But then on what basis was a postponement obtained?
The postponement was obtained because on the appointed day, I was not available.
No, you were. Like anyone that has got a job has to say to his employer, I can't be at work that day, I've been sued, I've got to go to court, I have an obligation as a defendant. My job as a judge is no greater importance than a judge of a cleaner or a motor mechanic. I am also an ordinary member of society. I am not elevated above any other status. Sorry, JP, I just can't be there on the Monday or the Tuesday because I'm a defendant, I'm an ordinary man.
If I may say this, Commissioner Helens, I had given Judge President Sangoni my word. What had happened in our division is that before this incident I mentioned, as part of NADEL, we had had a meeting with the JP because Deputy Judge President Van Zyl would know about this. There was a time when there were fewer judges than there ought to have been. I would not know the reason. But what would happen is that a judge would have to drive from Bishop, go and postpone matters in East London, and then go back to Bishop. Because we were, as practitioners, not happy with this, we had had a meeting with Judge Sangoni. I was one of the people who said, this ought never to happen again. If the court finds itself in this difficulty, we should be informed, we will make ourselves available. I am not in any way suggesting that the fact that I was acting made me to be special in any way. I'm not suggesting that.
But it did. Mr. Peter Pape and his wife, Lizanne Pape, were told, you can't go to court against this man on that day. He's a judge that day. That surely is wrong. I want to know whether you think it's wrong or you don't think it's wrong, because I have to test you for suitability.
Commissioner, it is wrong.
Then why did you do it?
I was going to say, in hindsight, now that you ask me, I know now that it is wrong. But at the time, what was of the primary concern to me was that the judge president had asked me, there was this difficulty. I had to assist. But as I said initially, when this request was made, I had mentioned that I had this issue and another issue.
Yes, but still you participated in that decision. Did it not occur to you until I raised this with you that what you did was wrong? To elevate your importance as a judge above the ability of a fellow man to take you to court on a day?
Commissioner, I had not looked at it the way you are raising it with me.
When I test you and your suitability, I must know that inherent in you is an inability to see that you have no greater importance other than when actually performing your judicial function than an ordinary man. Let me put it the other way around. Do you realize the impression of the judiciary you would have created? And I get it from this letter, and I can understand it readily. Here's a man wanting to sue you, and the justice system says to him, sorry, my man, not today. This guy's a judge. Gives a very poor impression of the judiciary.
Commissioner, as I said, what was uppermost in my mind at the time was to assist. I had been called upon to assist. That was what was uppermost in my mind at the time.
Mr. Malusi, I won't belabor the point, but even the late President Mandela, when he didn't have to, he went to the Gauteng court in Pretoria, subjected himself to strong cross-examination, kept his dignity, upheld that constitutional principle in his own mind that all men are equal before the law, and he was subjugated to an ordeal, let me tell you. And you for a matter about a trailer and money, deign to use the office of a judge to avoid your responsibilities in litigation. I find it astonishing.
With great respect, Commissioner, I did not take up the appointment to avoid going to court in this matter. If I had my office file with me, I would produce more than half a dozen letters where we are pleading with the plaintiff's attorneys to say, let's get this matter to court. Let's not delay this matter.
I'm not suggesting you used your office to avoid it, but I am saying you used your office to obtain a postponement because you thought it was right. You're above the law.
Not at all, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Great respect.
Doctor?
Mr. Malusi, would you, I think that you are leading us into temptation and putting us on trial. Would you agree?
I do not understand, Commissioner. Perhaps if you can expatiate so that I better understand your point. I'm sorry.
You had the judge president referring to integrity, which I believe is a fundamental quality of a person desiring to be appointed as a judge. Would you agree with that?
I agree fully, Commissioner.
Now, would you agree that for this commission to recommend a person whose integrity is suspect would damage the image of this commission?
Commissioner, may I make this distinction? My understanding of the Deputy Judge President was, if the matter when the matter proceeds to trial, if there is a credibility finding against you, then at that point there would be the consequences you outline.
Now, my point now, question is an independent question, and it says, would the recommendation of a person whose integrity is suspect by this commission not damage the image of this commission?
I would agree with you fully, Commissioner, if the integrity is suspect. I'll only say this, Commissioner. In these circumstances, we are not dealing with allegations that have not yet been tested. The allegations have been tested in court. There has been a ruling by overturned by the High Court on procedural grounds. That's all I am pointing out to the Commission. Beyond that, Commissioner, I cannot say anything more.
Would a finding that a person appointed as a judge has integrity problems not affect the image of the judiciary?
It would, Commissioner. I don't want to sound disrespectful, repeat the same thing again.
Now,
all I'm saying is that on the facts of this matter, that is highly unlikely.
if there is a potential that the image of this commission and the image of the judiciary can be affected by a finding that the integrity of the person appointed was problematic, wouldn't it be advisable for the aspirant judge to allow the law to take its course first before presenting him or herself before the commission?
If there was, I would agree with you, Commissioner. I would again, Commissioner, point out that you are saying a potential. all I would ask the Commission is, I know the Commission is in a difficult position in that the facts are not before it, but on what is known, on what the complainant himself has said, I would say this is very unlikely. It's a potential or a possibility. If we were speaking of a probability, this is what is likely to happen, then I would have withdrawn myself, because my personal interest or my appointment as a judge, I cannot allow that to tarnish the image of the judiciary as a whole. I wouldn't be here.
But do you also believe that justice is something that must be done and be seen to be done? Now, do you believe that the complainant in your matter would believe that justice is being done if the eminent lawyers sitting here recommend you for appointment as a judge and the president appoint you as a judge, whilst there is a member of the community that is aggrieved?
Commissioner, one of the things I had considered before coming here, after I had received the complaint, was exactly this question. My view is that since I had disclosed this from the very first time I came here exactly 2 years ago, this is a transparent attempt to try and influence the decision of this commission. This gentleman, when I came here on the 8th of October 2014, exactly the same reports were in the same newspapers as mentioning. It's not a new thing.
Clay, don't you think that a person like yourself, who is young, brilliant, should simply say, let me step aside, let the law take its course, and then I will come back and present myself?
Commissioner, if there was a matter that impacted on my credibility, I was saying, let's say I was charged criminally, Commissioner, a criminal charge regardless of the merits, then I would not have accepted the nomination. My point is, I would again ask the Commission to look at the ruling by the regional magistrate. I'm not at liberty to outline all the steps I've taken to try and get this matter heard and finalized, but the plaintiff is delaying the matter. The magistrate ruled in October 2015 in my favor. For 9 months, he did nothing. Only came in July to lodge an appeal.
Commissioner Nokis.
Thank you very much, Chief Justice. On this particular matter, I've not seen what the judgment of the magistrate and the appeal court is, but from you, if I understand, is that the appeal court set aside the order of the magistrate and remitted the matter back to the regional court.
That's correct, Commissioner.
In terms of the proceedings that are there at the magistrate court, they have reached a stage where all the plaintiff's witnesses and the plaintiffs have given their evidence, they have testified.
They've closed their case, Commissioner. What had happened is they led all the evidence they wished to lead. At the end of that, my legal representative, Advocate JSC, then applied to say, on the evidence they have presented, there is no case against me. I don't have to answer. And the magistrate agreed with that ruling, with that submission. She wrote a judgment to say they have not made a case.
All right.
But when the judges looked at it, they said the ruling she made was on the basis as if the entire case had been completed. She did not use the correct standard, which is the standard for absolution from the instance.
All right. Now, as things stand now, when you go back to that court, I mean, hearing the concern of the commissioners and the JP and the DJP is about you testify. Do you intend, I'm sorry to venture into your case. If you cannot answer me, you can. Do you intend testifying in the trial that is to come?
I don't intend to, but I am led by senior concern. If Advocate Zilwa is of the strong view that I must testify, then I will have to testify. But in my assessment, what ought to happen is we would say that's a defendant's case, and the magistrate would have to apply the same standard she had applied incorrectly in the absolution.
Right. I think in the act, it is envisaged that civil proceedings can be brought up against judges. Is it something that that you have a civil case against you? Is it something new? Is it something that is embarrassing on its own, that there is a civil case against you?
I'm gratified that Judge President Mlambo is here, because I had read this judgment whilst there had been an adjournment in court. You know, when you're doing a matter in court, counsel asks for a few minutes, you don't know how long it's going to be. But there's a judgment of the Gauteng division, Judge President Mlambo wrote. It involves a judge of that court, I believe it's a Judge Kumalo, I am not certain. But it's reported in 2016 volume 1 or 2015, the last volume last year, where the Honorable Judge President went into detail what needs to be done when there is a request to act against a judge, and he quoted a number of previous judgment. It is something that is known to our law that it happens. It's a regrettable thing. I would not want it to happen to me or any other judge, but it's a fact of life that regrettably judges at one time or another would get embroiled in this type of thing.
There is a concern about the last time when the matter was postponed, that it was postponed simply because you were a judge and all that. Can plaintiff or plaintiff in any litigation, is it not that it is open to him or her, if he does not want a matter to be postponed, to oppose postponement and have court ruling on that particular matter? What was this type of postponement on this one, this postponement that you're talking about? Did you agree, or was it the court, or was it after the court ruling? What was it? Because I just want to check whether you have not been delaying that matter, or whether you have been using the position of you as a judge when you're acting. I just want to get a sense out of that.
What had happened is shortly after my appointment, we had written, or my attorney had written to the plaintiff's attorneys and informed them that there is now this difficulty. I am hoping to still make myself available, but I could not be available because the people who had come to the High Court, it would cause far greater damage, in my estimation then, to the image of the judiciary, for people to be told that I wasn't there and I was attending to my own personal matter. But the postponement itself, it was not ordered by a court, it was by agreement. We had tendered the cost of the postponement because it was at my instance.
Lastly, I have looked onto the comments made by other bodies. Of course, I also note that you disclosed this civil this case in your questionnaire, but nonetheless, you have been. I mean, they have supported your appointment. How does that? How should we view that as well? I mean, when we decide on your application.
As tempting as the invitation is, Commissioner, Chief Justice, I would respectfully decline to be judging my own case. So I can only say I am humbled by the comments by my peers with regard to my candidacy before this Honorable Commission.
Thank you, Chief Justice.
Thank you, Commissioner Nokesi. Commissioner Stock.
No, thank you very much, CJ. Good morning, Mr. Malusi.
Morning, Commissioner.
Chief Justice, before I proceed to pose my questions to Mr. Malusi, I think I just need to make one bona fide confession, if you allow it. And that confession relates to, it's not the first time that Malusi appears before us. And then there's an issue that pains me personally as a commissioner, that there's a lot of potential in the candidature of Mr. Malusi. He's also a young man, a vibrant young man. But every time he comes to the commission for an interview, there's something that follows him to the interview. I think that's what pains me. And I thought I must make that confession. Mr. Malusi, the last time you came for the interview, last year in 2015, one of the reasons why you were also not appointed was the fact that there was an issue about your directorship of 4 companies. So I want you to take us into confidence. Since the last time and your acceptance of the nomination to avail yourself for the interview for this vacancy, what is the status quo? What has changed? Is there an improvement? Because I will tell you why I'm asking this question to you. The complaint that is laid against you, one of your companies was actually involved in that complaint. So yes. Can you take us through what happened? What is the status quo?
Commissioner, as I indicated the last time, 2 of the companies are not active. The one company that is active and that is involved with the trucks, it's in the process of being registered in my wife's name. She is already a signatory in the bank account of that company. If there is one lesson I have learned from this civil case, Commissioner, it's the wisdom of saying if one wants to be elevated to the bench, you must not be involved in business in any shape or form. That is the lesson I take from this. I can assure the Commission that I would not be involved in any companies in any capacity, be it an advisor in any way.
So what's your view around, there was an advice that was given to you last time you appeared before us, and it's also recorded in the transcripts of the last interview. Honorable Commissioner Malema gave you a friendly advice to say every time you come here and appear before us, with such a potential that we have in you, it's actually opening you up for unnecessary criticism. And then he gave you an advice to say, look, take a back seat, go and resolve whatever issues that are there before you appear before us. So that the next time you come to appear before the commission, there's no smaller issues that will be still following you. The smaller shenanigans. So, smaller shenanigans. So I want to know from you, Mr. Malusi, that have you followed the advice?
I certainly took the advice, Commissioner. This is why I have not been back before this commission up until this occasion. With regard to the civil claim, I had thought it had been finalized when the plaintiff did not appeal for 9 months, but then it came back, and when I studied the High Court judgment, I took comfort from the fact that the learned judges set aside the lower court judgment on the basis of a procedural step, not to say they are persuaded that I have done wrong, but on the basis that the incorrect test was applied by the lower court. My view, Commissioner, is I came here because from my experience in following the proceedings of this commission with regard to other people, not necessarily me, with regard to other people, I had confidence that this commission would see through when someone tries to use this commission for advancing their own personal interests. Because this commission has made itself clear on previous occasions that it considers matters and inclusion. So I had that confidence in coming here.
In terms of your own view, what are the attributes of a good judge?
The attributes of a good judge, it's knowledge of the law, it's independence of mind, it's someone of a good character, it's someone who is experienced in the practice of the law. It's someone who is balanced generally. And in the present circumstances, what you would require of a good judge is someone who is sensitive to the transformation imperatives that are now required at this time in the history of our country.
Lastly, your view on judicial accountability?
Judicial accountability is at the core of an independent judiciary, and it's at the core of the members of the public having confidence in the judiciary, because members of the judiciary are not elected. Their accountability comes in the form of when they make their decisions, they give a reasoned judgment, so that members of the community can have confidence that that particular judge had considered everything in coming to the decision. There is also accountability in the form of a particular judge accounting to the judge president or the deputy judge president accounting to the chief justice. That relates to the administrative side of it. That is use of public resources. So it's in both respects that you get accountability of a judge.
Thank you, CJ.
Thank you, Commissioner Stock. Commissioner Singh.
Thank you very much, Chief Justice, and good morning, Mr. Malusi.
Morning, Commissioner.
Just to use your own words and that of Commissioner Stock, it is quite regrettable that every time you appear before us, some of these issues seem to be following you, unresolved issues. But having said that, I think at one of your other interviews, not the last one, the one before that, you did indicate that you run a very successful practice. Is that still the case?
It is the case. The practice is still continuing, Commissioner.
And you did indicate to us that you had delayed some judgments because of the number of people that seem to want you to represent them in matters, and they come to your office in queues, and that was one of the reasons you had advanced.
Yes.
Okay. Now, in response to a question by the Deputy Judge President, you indicated that you would be prepared to relocate to Port Elizabeth. So are you prepared then to sacrifice your love for the community and their matters, and also the interest that your wife has in your practice, to move to Port Elizabeth? I just want to know, whether that was an honest discussion with your wife, who's a member of your practice there.
Yes. My wife, who happens to be my partner in practice, Commissioner, her practice is mainly conveyancing. I'm a litigation attorney in that I go to court almost every week. I appear in the High Court and the lower courts. So if I were to be appointed, I would not have been available to my practice in any event. With regard to her own practice, the indications are that even if she were to relocate to Port Elizabeth, she would still be in a position to conduct her conveyancing practice, because the clients that she assists mostly, in fact, it's exclusively government departments. We do not have the banks and such institutions as clients. So she's on the database, for example, of the Department of Human Settlements. All that would need to happen is for her to inform the Department of Human Settlements that the office has relocated from East London to Port Elizabeth, so that she is given instructions in the Port Elizabeth area and not in East London.
So the community, which would up to now rely on your astuteness and the benefit of your wisdom, would lose out if you go to Port Elizabeth.
They would not lose out, Commissioner, because I'm going to Port Elizabeth. They would lose out because I've been elevated to the bench. Even if I were to be appointed to the bishop post, my wife retains the same practice we have. They would still lose out because I would not be available to my practice. That's how I had looked at it, Commissioner.
The second and last question is, are you aware of the composition of the bench in terms of race and gender representativity at the current moment?
That is nationally, Commissioner.
In the division, the Eastern Cape?
Yes, I am. I'm quite familiar. I've acted in that division, Commissioner, for quite some time.
Can you just give us an idea of what the makeup is?
I'm not going to be able to give you the precise numbers. Fortunately, the Deputy Judge President is here. But what I can say, Commissioner, is with regard to a bishop, there is two women judges. The honorable judges are white ladies. In that seat of court, there is also the Deputy Judge President Van Zyl is based in that court. And then there is Judge Mbenenge. That is the composition of the Bishop Court. With regard to the Port Elizabeth Court, the senior judge in that court is a black judge. By that I mean he's of Indian or Asian descent. And then there are 4 judges who are white. And presently there is only 1 black judge in that court.
The last question as a follow-up, your view on women empowerment and gender equity?
My view, Commissioner, is that it's a matter of priority. I am all for it, Commissioner. If in these present circumstances, the Commission were to be of the view that my colleague, Advocate Krause, because of this particular requirement, the Commission is of the view that she must be recommended, I would gladly accept it. Because the true test of one's principles is when those principles are against your own personal interest. Every one of us can claim to have this or that principle, but you are only truly tested when the application of that principle is against your own personal interest.
Thank you, Mr. Malusi. Thank you, Chief Justice.
Well said.
Thank you, Chief Justice.
Commissioner Semenya.
Chief Justice, thank you. Mr. Malusi, speaking truthfully though, as a defendant in a civil action, you're not a compellable witness. Am I right?
Certainly, Commissioner.
So that if you decide to close your case without testifying, there can't be credibility findings against you.
Definitely not, Commissioner. This is why, Commissioner, I had said when I had been asked earlier, my view is I do not see the regional magistrate changing her view that the plaintiff has not made out a case for me to answer. But it is not my decision, because I had asked JSC because of the respect I have for him. If he insists that I testify, then I would have to.
But even if you don't testify and the judgment goes against you, it would have absolutely no integrity issues in it.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not, Commissioner.
And if you elected to pay the claimed amount and settle the matter, it would absolutely have no integrity issues with you.
Absolutely not, Commissioner. Commissioner, I had been advised that in light of this matter,
you still on?
Yes, Commissioner. I may have a moment. I had been advised, Commissioner.
Would you want to take a moment, or are you fine? These things do happen to us, you know. You want to pause a bit?
No.
And recollect?
I think I'm fine now, Chief Justice.
Are you okay? Very well.
I had been advised that the simplest thing to do is to pay the 140,000 and walk away. I have the money. I could have paid it. But my view was that I would have bought my way to the bench. It would have been against all my principles.
But there is
I refuse to pay this man so that I'm appointed, because I believe I do not owe him money. That's the reason I have not paid. But you are correct. I can pay the 140,000 tomorrow, and that's the end of it.
But also there is an unfounded premise that if you testified, you would be found wanting.
This is why, Commissioner, I am repeating myself. Perhaps I'm not eloquent. Perhaps I'm not expressing myself well enough. This is why I am saying I agree with Commissioner Helens. I agree with all. There is this potential. Speaking in the abstract, there is this potential. But if we look at the facts of this case, there is absolutely no likelihood that unless I turn out to be a horrible witness, unless I turn out to be a horrible witness, there is no likelihood whatsoever that there is going to be this sort of finding against me, even if I testify.
But even if you are a horrible witness, it would not mean you are a dishonest witness.
I agree, Commissioner.
Okay, let's go on a lighter note now. Commissioner Motshekga has a pet passion with the hierarchy of various legal systems under our Constitution, the Roman Dutch law, the customary law, and the common law. Now, let's talk about this. When somebody concludes a civil marriage, they are precluded subsequently to conclude customary unions. Is that your understanding of the law as well?
Yes, it is, Commissioner.
And yet, if they start by concluding customary unions, they're still permitted to conclude a civil marriage. Is that also your understanding of the law?
That's a correct interpretation of the law.
So that seems to mean that monogamy as a practice seems to enjoy a status higher than cultural practices of certain people.
Commissioner, if we are honest with ourselves, the premise of our law is based on a centuries-old prejudice that the practices of the indigenous people of this country are inferior, barbaric, and so on.
No, don't go that far.
It is incumbent on those of us who occupy these positions, who are afforded the opportunity to correct these issues, to do this, because the Constitution says common law and customary law must be developed in accordance with the principles in the Constitution.
Yes, Section 9 would deal with the question of equality, that everybody must have equal benefit of the law, whether they are practicing one culture or another. And so does Section 30 of the Constitution, dealing with the right to practice one's culture, both underpinned clearly by their compliance with the Bill of Rights. We must do something, don't you think?
Certainly, Commissioner, I agree fully.
I have no further questions, Chief
Thank
Justice.
you, Advocate Semenya. Prof?
Thank you, CJ. Molo Mfondini.
Molo, ma'am.
Right. We are both from King Williamstown. I'm from Kaga, the rural area. You are from Zwelitsha.
If I knew that, I would have said Molom Kai.
Okay, be that as it may. The issue that I have is the quality of access to justice. I'm from the rural area, from Kaga. But we still access the court at Zwelitsha. I'm glad that the minister is here. We, in fact, the Ciskayans, we still access the courts at Zwelitsha, whilst there is central King Williamstown, where there is a court. So the people from the villages, they take taxis or buses from the villages to King Williamstown, and then from King Williamstown, they still take taxis to Zwelitsha in order for their cases to be heard. What is the impact of this differentiation on the quality of access to justice? Just give us your opinion.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner, it's an issue that I believe is unique to our division in this country. Fortunately, the Deputy Judge President is here. He is based in Bisho. Us as practitioners in that area have raised this issue, that up until this time, the apartheid boundaries are still there. you can take it further, Commissioner. If you wish to go to the High Court, you are residing in King Williamstown. Your matter is heard by the local court in King Williamstown. There is a court up the road, less than 3 kilometers from where you reside. But when you have to go to the High Court, you have to drive an hour and some odd, a distance of about 150 kilometers, to go to Grahamstown, because the High Court in Bisho is not available to you, because Bisho was part of the former Cisco. It hampers access to justice significantly. I speak as a practitioner in that area. We have people who, when you explain these issues to them, people simply say they'd rather give up on their rights because the expense involved is beyond them. But I can, Commissioner, place this on record, that the Deputy Judge President, Judge President Sangoni, we know for a fact, we've had meetings with them as Nadel and other organizations. Submissions have been made to the relevant authorities, but this issue just seems incapable of being resolved, and our people are suffering.
Okay, let me leave it there because we don't seem to have a solution. But your response to your question on customary marriages, that to date, they still succumb to civil marriages. But we have the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act that was adopted in 1998, which give equal status or equal recognition to the marriages. That if you are married according to customary law, you cannot marry according to civil law, or to have your customary marriage being killed by your civil marriage. But your answer to that question?
I understood Commissioner Semenya to be making the point that our law does not view these marriages equally. It would appear that the treatment of the law regards the one form of a marriage to be, in a way, inferior to the other form of marriage. In that, if you start with this one, you are allowed to go on and have the other one. But if you start with the other one, you are not allowed to proceed and have the other. That's a point I agreed to.
So if you are given an opportunity to be appointed as a judge, and you are confronted by this situation, we know very well that the courts particularly are being criticized for being insensitive to customary law issues. How would you ensure the development of the principles of customary law in their own context? I hope you understand what I mean. How would you develop the principles of customary law in their own context without importing the common law conceptions of marriages?
As a judge, the role of a judge, Commissioner, is to apply the law.
Which law?
The law that is prevailing in the country at the moment. With regard to what you are saying, customary law, the role of a judge would be to apply customary law as it stands. If you are of the view that it must be developed, you then develop it. But it is not a role of a judge, as I understand it, to change the law. The honorable members of parliament are here. That is their role, because our constitution provides for a separation of powers. I may have strong views that a particular law is not in the interest of a particular section of our population. But it is not the role of a judge to legislate. As tempting as it is when we are on the bench to correct a wrong, you see, the Constitutional Court has hammered this a number of times. When you are presiding, you must be careful not to cross the boundaries, because the courts themselves are bound by the Constitution to play only their role and not to interfere in the sphere of the legislature or the executive.
Yes, Prof.
Okay, MK, let me take you back. I am an academic. When it comes to customary law, we talk of the living version of customary law and the official version of customary law, meaning that when we talk of the living version, we talk of the law that is practiced. When we talk of official one, is the one that is codified. Yes. Which in this instance of customary law marriages now, it has been codified. But how do you strike a balance between this living version as a judge, because it has not been put before you, but you know that the requirements of a marriage in customary law, for example, is lobola. Even though in the recognition of customary law marriages, lobola is not included as a requirement, but what that legislation requires is it has to be celebrated according to custom. And that custom cannot be celebrated if lobola as the foundation of this marriage was never negotiated into. So how do you as a judge now strike a balance between these laws?
To confine myself to the example we are making, Commissioner, the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act provides that the marriage must be concluded according to customary rights. Then as a judge, you will then have to check what are the customary rights. Have they been observed? I've been involved in a matter similar to what you are raising, where it had to be decided who had the right to bury a deceased person. Was the marriage concluded in accordance with customary law? So you then there look at the point you are raising. Has lobola been paid? Has the bride been delivered by her family? So you are getting to the detail now of the customary law. My view is that in that respect, though the Act does not specify that you have to pay lobola, it's a national act, we have to be alive to that. There are other ethnic groups in this country that may not necessarily practice what we practice in this province as the Xhosa people. I do not know what the practice of the Pedi or the Tswana is. So I am alive why the legislature deemed it fit to say it must be in accordance with customary rights. And then each of our different ethnic groups would have its own customs with regard to that. So it is my view that in that respect, the law appears to show difference to our customs. I cannot criticize the law in that respect, Commissioner.
So why do civil marriages overshadow? Then in that context, why would civil marriages overshadow customary law marriages if customary law is also constitutionally recognized as a legitimate system of this country?
This is the point I had considered to Commissioner Semenya. It would appear, if one looks critically at the legislation, it's informed by a particular view. Because if these types of marriages were treated equally, one would have expected that the law would provide customary marriages are recognized, and they are on equal footing with the civil marriages.
Judge President Mlambo and commissioners, let me just say, those of you who have earlier flights, start arranging for later flights, because at this rate, we're not going to get done anytime soon. So just make alternative arrangements. Commissioner Mlambo.
Thank you, Chief Justice. Mr. Malusi, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Judge President.
I'm very well. I'm happy you read my judgment. It shows that they mean something when we write them. There are people who read them. But it's a judgment that, as JP, I had to write.
JP, without being had to be flattering you, I thought it's a well-written judgment. There ought to be no doubt for anyone after reading that judgment what the law says.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Just on the issue where you were quizzed on about getting a postponement being granted because you were acting, I just wanted to know for future purposes, I say this as JP, that even permanent judges have personal issues and they go to the JP and say, JP, on that day, I have an issue. Would you excuse me? You should do that in future if something like this happens. I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say.
I understand you fully. Yes. I thank you for that advice, Judge President.
It's a prudent thing to do, to say people don't shield behind the office of judge. Their life continues like anyone else. So the JP's office is there. You go to him, say, JP, on that day I have this issue. Please excuse me.
Thank you, Judge President.
Right. Just dealing with your exposure. My interest as JP, I represent other JPs, so I need to get a feel of your experience and suitability. You've acted, when I count, about 25 months in the Eastern Cape. It's quite an extensive acting period. And you've written judgments. How was your experience sitting in the opposed motion courts of both of the courts, the way you sat in? I think you say Port Elizabeth, I think Bisho as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's an experience I thoroughly enjoyed, JP, in that when you are in motion court, be it opposed or unopposed motion, you go in there prepared, you hold a particular view, but when you get to court, you get submissions. You have to think quickly.
Yes.
I particularly enjoy the challenge of exchanging views with the counsel.
Yes.
I have had no difficulty with motion court. I have even asked when there were difficulties, a particular judge assigned to motion court was not available. I've offered myself because, as I say, it's something I enjoy.
Yes. Now, in terms of your exposure, you pardon me, did you also do criminal trials?
Indeed, JP.
For how long?
I did them from 2012 right up until now, JP. If I may mention this, JP, based on the experience I had gathered, if you have regard to my application, there is a question, are there any outstanding matters? There is an outstanding matter, State versus Lüneburg and another. It's a matter trial in the PE High Court. I was not supposed to have done that matter according to the role as it was drawn. But the senior judge in that court, because of the experience I had gathered,
yes,
of the people who were available, he swapped the role to say he's specifically assigning me to that case because it was presenting with a particular complexity.
Right.
Just briefly, JP, it's a...
Oh, you don't have to go there.
Yes.
I just wanted to test whether you've sat in criminal trials.
Yes. Thank you.
Now, you say in your application you appear in the, I think you said small claims court, the CCMA, not small claims, CCMA and the bargaining councils and the labor court, as well as the high court and the magistrates courts. Is that correct?
That's correct. My practice, JP, is general practice.
Have you had matters in the SCA which your firm is involved in?
Yes, JP. The latest matter we have is a land claims matter.
Yes.
Where it was heard by the SCA during the month of May.
Yes.
The judgment was reserved. We have had a few matters.
You briefed counsel to go to that matter?
Yes, we briefed counsel to go to that court.
Like,
I've not appeared in the SCA nor in the Constitutional Court, JP.
Yeah. But you've had matters in those courts?
Yes, JP.
And you've briefed counsel?
Yes, we've briefed senior counsel, JP.
Now, just going back to your constitutional understanding of issues, under what circumstances can the Bill of Rights be amended by Parliament?
My understanding, JP, is that there would have to be a two-thirds majority for the legislature to amend any of the provisions in Chapter 2, that is the Bill of Rights of the Constitution.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, JP.
Commissioner Malema, you are excused, sir. You are excused.
Thank you, Chief Justice, and thank you to the commissioners for the opportunity.